Welcome to Dose of Depth podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Lukovich, and I invite you to explore what's beneath the surface of all sorts of things, including your own life. Through conversation, stories, and education, you'll see what you couldn't see before, find new meaning in old events, and even discover a new sense of purpose out there in the world. Let's get started. In this episode, I read a blog post I wrote following a couple of weeks of processing after the election. It's titled Navigating Election Aftermath: Processing Emotions, Setting Boundaries, Countering Violence, and Rebuilding Community. The night before I started the blog post, I watched the first episode of the new series on HBO of Dune. And these three quotes stood out to me, so I want to start by sharing them. Quote, "Victory is celebrated in the light, but it is won in the darkness." Another quote, "Adversity always lies on the path of advancement." And the third one is, "One way or another, the past always finds us." Dune, Prophecy, the TV series, Season 1, Episode 1. Whether you were devastated by the election results or happy about them, if you can self-reflect, you will find something helpful in this post. It's longer than usual, so grab a coffee, tea, or a nice glass of wine, maybe a pen and notebook, and dive into my reflections about how to move forward post-election without compromising your values. You're used to my proclamations that something important is working itself out during this regressive period in American and global history. Unfortunately, the regression is only accelerating, and it isn't clear what will need to happen to force new and just ideas about human dignity into consciousness that can overcome the hold that well-funded corrupt systems currently maintain. Extremism is climaxing to force us to transcend old ideas and beliefs that have become stagnant, rigid, and unjust. The extremists are playing their role. They take pleasure in taunting you. They're belligerent and mean, less rational, and becoming more vengeful and violent. We're all being backed into a corner. You've probably discovered that tolerance, appeasement, negotiation, and capitulation aren't the answers. There's an insatiable nature to those who have become swept up in the regression. Something must run its course. The artists, philosophers, psychologists, historians, wise people already know their role. What's yours? Soon you will have no option but to take action to stop the madness, working to usher in progress and begin the healing process. If not, you are in danger of becoming that good German who stood by in the presence of evil. In this post, I offer a framework to help you maintain sanity, protect your mental health, and uncover the meaning of your emotional reactions to others, and wonder about why others perceive you to be a threat. Others, in this case, also include an entire group movement that has taken on the characteristics of an abuser. Once you explore the deeper wounds that cause you to react to others emotionally, which sets aside objectively bad behavior on the part of others, you'll be able to discover what those people might be projecting onto you and vice versa. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotions and feeling helpless, you will see the truth of the situation more clearly and respond confidently instead of reacting emotionally. As you build the skill to become an observer of your own life, you will notice that when you do not react in the way others expect you to, they want and need you to feed their inner monster. You'll throw them off kilter, and a doorway will open for potential human connection. Their trance may even be broken. You might not be able to see how your response or reaction to people and events impacts the world around you every day, but that's precisely how the world changes. Not by being silent and avoiding conflict, not by waiting for an authority figure to take care of it for you, but by responding effectively, not reacting emotionally. C.G. Jung, one of the founders of depth psychology, disliked groups. He warned that a group's psyche could become that of a wild animal. He suggested that humanity's fate depended on the self-reflecting individual with a solid inner moral authority to overcome mass-minded ideas and reject warped interpretations of religious doctrine. I agree it's unfair that others can't self-reflect and that some of us must bear the burden of seeing what others can't or won't. To that I respond, to whom much is given, much is expected, as the saying goes. The world has always relied on small groups of activists to challenge systems, even bravely putting their lives in danger on behalf of the collective. It is also unfair that most fail to remember that their privileges exist only because of those activists. There's no time to whine about that now, although it is good to remind people of this fact in specific and relatable ways. Part 1. Managing or repairing broken relationships, especially with yourself. The morning after the election, my 2 young adult children, ages 24 and 26, sobbed. I sobbed too, at the realization that I came of age during what was probably the peak of our current systems. Something died on election day. It was so heavy, but because of our close relationship and my depth psychological perspective, by the end of the day, my children and I had successfully made our way through most of the phases of the grieving process. Soon, we were having spirited conversations about resisting and countering the coming darkness, channeling negative emotions like anger and exasperation into empowered actions like speaking up and standing up for those demonized and scapegoated. Over the past 3 weeks, some clients have also needed space to process conflicting emotions, including anger, confusion, exhaustion, anxiety, and even despair. My role is to help them find meaning in their experience, to pull them into a future version of themselves, the version their soul wants them to play during this part of their lives. After all, we don't get to pick and choose what time in history we live in. Again, whether you are devastated or happy about the election results, these steps will help you become more self-aware. This will allow you to see the truth of the situation and respond more effectively, even helping the other person hear and understand the more profound message you intend to convey. No matter what, increased self-awareness results in self-compassion, which makes it possible to feel compassion for others. Quickly, here are the steps to this process. Step 1, validate your own emotions. Emotions are part of the body and cannot be controlled, which is why we hate it when other people trigger us. We feel helpless, but why do we feel so? That's the task. We do have more control over feelings and thoughts about their meaning, so first allow and linger in the difficult emotions. Eventually, they will communicate what they want from you. And I offer in the blog post some links to guided meditations to help you with this. They're on my podcast as well, and they're called Breathe With Me, Guided Active Imagination for Anxiety, and Exploring Anger Through Active Imagination. Another note, while I say that you cannot control emotions as they're happening, you do have the capacity to put yourself into a preferred emotional state. So I just want to discern there. Step number 2, uncover what you could be projecting onto the other person. In the book, Monsters in Life and Literature, forensic psychologist Peter DeMuth sums up this concept concisely. Quote, projection is that tendency to put into others what we most wish to avoid in ourselves. The thing we wish to avoid in ourselves is our shadow. End quote. Intense emotion, projection, and an underlying complex are likely at play, rooted in a wound that happened a long time ago. Another brilliant mind, Dr. Craig Chalquist, suggested that many liberal or progressive people are projecting their aggression onto others, who have coalesced as today's GOP. Meaning forcing the GOP to express our own inner rage because we feel it is wrong to do so. We could say the same about members of the GOP who have done such a good job of demonizing what it means to be, quote, liberal, that many MAGA members are disgusted at the show of normal love and affection. It's complicated at an individual level, but when it coalesces at the group level, we can see the projection more clearly, how one group carries what is in the other group's shadow that they're not conscious of. Step number 3, imagine what the other person might be projecting onto you. If both parties have emotions, try to uncover your projection and complex before wondering what the other person might be projecting onto you. If you're the emotional one, the answer resides in you. If the other person is emotional, the answer resides inside them. Many times there's a codependent dynamic where the response of one triggers an emotional response in the other, and then it's difficult to step away. One of my most popular resources is my 3 Ps framework for finding the deeper meaning in relationships, and that's in a blog post, and I also read it on my podcast. Step number 4, disrupt the codependent nature of the relationship by responding differently. There are stories of the rare police officer who can de-escalate a potentially violent situation. How is this done? In these cases, the police officer has not been triggered and can sometimes disrupt the perpetrator's expectations with compassion, respect, or neutrality. This might disarm the perpetrator briefly, making it possible to connect deeply on a human level, which is enough time to take him into custody peacefully. This nonviolent resistance is a skill you can build to disrupt deeply entrenched emotional response patterns with others. And I offer a link to a blog post about a modern application for nonviolent resistance you might want to check out. Step number 5, back the other person into self-reflection. If you can get your wits about you, an effective way to respond to someone emotional or irrational is to ask, why do you believe that? Repeatedly. Instead of debating, correcting, or defending, you just keep asking the question, why do you believe that? Where did that come from? Why do you believe that? Where did that come from? People actually appreciate being heard, but old resentment and defensiveness may inhibit their ability to explain what they mean. By repeatedly asking, why do you believe that? They might discover and be surprised by the root of their belief. Being conscious of the deeper belief is empowering. Now they can make a choice. This exercise is not for the faint of heart, and neither is it your job to do this. However, if you're curious, you might actually enjoy experimenting with your capacity to back people into self-reflection. Cult deprogramming experts say that it's only when a cult member discovers they've been lied to that they then will question everything else, which might lead to the unraveling of their self-imposed prison in the cult. Your question might be the pivot or tipping point. And I also offer a link to a video to listen to a cult expert. Step number 6, determine what might not be yours to fix and refocus on where your attention is needed. Some of us have a savior complex. Mine is finally weakening. We think we're the hero when we're not. Who put ourselves in charge of ensuring someone else's life goes well? That may have come from a parent making you responsible for their happiness. Shake it off. The hidden agenda of our good intentions is to make us feel better or to avoid witnessing someone else's suffering. Stop interfering in other people's journeys. If you can pull yourself away from the self-appointed role as fixer, you might discover it was just a distraction from answering the call to what wants to emerge from you. Fixing other people is a way of avoiding our psychological and spiritual journey. Some short case studies. The following 3 examples illustrate how these steps can sometimes quickly lead to new insights and dissipate anxiety and other negative emotions. I've tried to offer examples that capture what you might currently be struggling with. Example 1, feeling betrayed by someone's vote. This client's emotions were fresh and raw. Our session was just days after the election. I changed her name, of course. Marcia, my client. I texted my sister after the election and felt so guilty about my text that I apologized immediately. Me, why did you apologize? Marcia, it was mean. Me, your text? What was mean about it? Marcia said, how could you vote for XXX? You hurt me. Me, why is that mean? You asked your sister a fair question and told her how something she did hurt you. Marcia, I've always protected her. Me, from what? Why are you protecting your adult sister from the consequences of her behavior? Marcia, I never looked at it that way. In a few exchanges, my client saw how she had played the role of appeaser in her relationship with her sister for years, who she says is quite belligerent. First, my client needed to validate her own emotions. Second, I helped her see her emotional reaction was about something old. Feeling hurt was more about a long-term pattern of not being direct and honest with her sister over the years because her sense of security got in the way. Third, I reminded her that protecting someone isn't always in their best interest. If she had never been direct with her sister over the years, how could she expect her sister to consider her feelings now? There are natural consequences that, when suffered, result in growth, and my client could be preventing her sister's growth. I also suggested to my client that she could communicate more effectively, and we walked through a potential start with heart communication that she could do in person or via email. There's a link in my blog post to my resources page with a template for Start with Heart conversation. Example 2, the right to take a break or end a tradition. In this example, another client always feared communicating negative emotions to her sister. She received a text from her sister that left her feeling attacked, and this coincided with plans for the holiday season. Already a strained relationship, the result of the election forced a reckoning. Me. Why did you feel attacked? Denise. Her name has changed, of course. My sister regularly asks me questions about my life, and after I answer, she often asks, "What's wrong?" I feel defensive about how I'm feeling at that moment, and resentment wells up in me. She might say something like, "After you're done with X, are you going to take a break?" I feel like the question is covering up a hidden agenda. I feel judged before I even answer the question. Me. Why do you care? Denise. She bothers me, but then I question whether I'm being selfish. Me. So, you don't feel you have a right to your emotions? Denise. I'm much older than her, and as a child, I had to take her everywhere. Me. So you feel responsible for her and resent it? Maybe you also resent yourself for not being able to stop automatically anticipating and adapting to her potential emotional state. Denise, I can see where I think I don't have choices when I do. Me, we always have a choice, even if it's about how to think about the situation, but there are consequences to our choices. We might fear the consequences, which is why we don't make the choice that needs to be made. So resentment builds and gets expressed even in benign situations. That stored up energy needs to be released at some point. Denise, yes, I can see now that I do have a choice. I don't want to be around her, especially because she visibly disapproves of my gay daughter who has found love with a partner. That deeply hurts me. Me, then don't be around her. Don't invite her to a sacred family gathering. Denise, I can't do that. Me, why not? I'm not ready. What Denise was ready for was to be more curious about this year's Thanksgiving gathering. I suggested she try to slip into the role of observer. She could sit back and observe the gathering as if she were watching a Netflix movie, and even find some humor in the ridiculousness of her sister's insecurity, masked as being judgmental of others. Then we could debrief during our next session. This brought her great relief and a sense of empowerment where there wasn't before. You can see how we worked through the phases. Example 3, challenging our parents. I too struggle, specifically with my father. Every human is a complex mixture of inherited tendencies, patterns that develop from childhood based on avoiding pain or pursuing pleasure, patterns that get entrenched and are difficult to reverse. Without a framework or capacity to self-reflect or courage to seek therapy, resentment builds. And when the proper authority figure, propped up by a corporate media company, appears as the savior, people can easily get swept up. But there is hurt and there is damage. Over the past 8 years, my ability to converse with my father about various topics has diminished. My father, who had expanded his tolerance through watching his 3 daughters grow into strong, independent women, has regressed. For example, his former embrace of feminism as the right to self-determination has been replaced with misogynistic comments, not about me, but about women in general. After attempting diversionary tactics to refocus conversations, eventually I had no choice but to ask for a boundary that specific topics were off limits. My father did a decent job of honoring the boundary. Still, during one lunch about a year ago, I could see the resentment and anger welling up in him until he blurted out an emotional and irrational comment that was objectively false. Challenging the statement just made it worse, so I calmly got up from the table in the restaurant, disposed of my trash, returned to the table, and asked, "Can we start over?" It was too late. The anger had to go somewhere. I said, "Thank you for lunch. I'm leaving." I was shaking as I walked out on my own father, but it had to be done. I was not going to be a victim, a punching bag for his lifetime of resentment, which needed someplace to go. I didn't give up on our relationship, though. I stopped on the drive home 20 minutes later and reminded him in a text of the boundary he had agreed to and told him the consequence of not honoring it was that he wouldn't be seeing me. 3 weeks later, we had a wonderful lunch. My father hugged me so hard after lunch, which oddly reminded me of the fact that when children are given boundaries, their stress levels decrease. The moral of the story is that standing up for myself was the right thing to do and that it helped my relationship with my father. He also cared enough to honor the boundary, although imperfectly. It is possible that walking out on him was shocking enough to back him into a bit of self-reflection. One can only hope. I would have had to absorb his anger like a punching bag if I had not dared to confront him as an authority figure and warn him of the natural consequences of not abiding by it. I'm not willing to do that. You shouldn't either. I'm sad about the situation. I feel like a parent instead of a grown daughter, but it's okay. There is a way to do this dance, and I can help you, by the way. Part 2. How people are being primed to accept and commit violence. This is a quote from Dr. Peter Demuth's book, Monsters in Life and Literature. Quote, "By constructing such a psychological barrier between ourselves and the individual who commits horrific acts, we gain a sense of security that reinforces our sense of goodness." End quote. On the eve of the election, I was ready to celebrate, but prepared to dive into finding meaning in the alternative universe if it should occur. There's always a hidden agenda behind my procrastination. A couple of months ago, I was introduced to Dr. Peter Demuth, a forensic psychologist and author of Monsters in Life and Literature. Appreciating the mysterious workings of my unconscious, I released my guilt about procrastinating and picked up the book last week, finishing it in 3 days. C.G. Jung's study of the most extreme psychiatric patients reinforced the truth that we all contain the potential for good and evil. And yet, so many desperately seek scapegoats to absorb their resistance to this fact in themselves. Dr. Demuth's book beautifully educates the reader about available theories explaining how a person becomes violent. While this might sound boring, the author brings these concepts to life through his analysis of many familiar monster stories, including Frankenstein, Dracula, Phantom of the Opera, the werewolf, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Pied Piper, the Golem, and Dorian Gray. I was wide-eyed, especially after reading about dark adaptation, a term describing the process by which someone can become antisocial or criminal in their orientation. You do not need to be a forensic psychologist to acknowledge that a significant portion of our population is being groomed to accept and even commit violence towards individuals who have become scapegoats. For example, immigrants, migrants, trans people, Muslims, Palestinians, women, Democrats, liberals, atheists, many more. They are determined to be scapegoats by certain people in power who seek to sow division to distract from their larger agenda of further entrenching wealth and power. Whether you have been swept up unwittingly in the growing darkness or are horrified watching this happen to your neighbors, family, friends, and coworkers, understanding this process at a basic level will help you respond more effectively. You will get better at discerning between those who are aware that they are manipulating others to become more powerful versus those whose psychology has made them unwitting victims of disinformation and the lure of a cult leader who plays the role of Father God. Either way, you will learn more about yourself and others, contributing to healing and unifying against the correct enemy, corporate greed. The Lonnie Athens model of violence. My friend Dr. Craig Chalquist, who has expertise working with domestic abusers, shared his insights about what was on display at the Republican National Convention, that it was characteristic of an abuser. His TikTok video illustrating this fact went viral. It's up to 157,000 views. mainly because it assured victims of violence that they were not crazy for being triggered by the violent rhetoric of today's GOP. My blog post includes a link to the TikTok video. I'll include it in the description box here too. In our efforts to maintain compassion for fellow human beings, many of us have been led to believe that we must tolerate intolerance. Rubbish. We must not obey in advance, or we will become victims. Although the exhaustion of retaining or claiming our sense of personal power makes it tempting to acquiesce, we must recognize what we are modeling for our children. My goal in sharing these stages from Dr. Demuth's fine book is to empower you to do what you must to protect your sanity, regardless of the reaction you are likely to receive. If you need space from family members, then demand it and ignore the childish temper tantrums of people who have yet to suffer consequences of their belligerence. On the other hand, if you have been swept up in the madness and are suffering too, you might discover how you have been manipulated and are being groomed to do bad things on behalf of powerful people who do not care about you. You are already a victim of abuse. Or if you choose to stay in the movement, you might grow your understanding of how others feel hurt by your choice. Either way, everyone has a chance to grow. As I outline the stages of Lonnie Athens' model of violence, notice what resonates with you. Have you fallen prey to subjugation and violent coaching? Or have you unintentionally found yourself playing the role of perpetrator of belligerency masked as, quote, owning the libs? I suspected there was something sinister going on inside people who feel pleasure at other people's expense. No shame, just awareness and self-compassion are the goals. Another quote from Dr. Demuth's book. Most individuals can adjust back and forth between light and dark, but it is reasonable to assume that the longer one stays in any one condition, the ability to adjust back to the other, or even the desire to adjust back, becomes compromised and truncated. The Lonnie Athens model has 4 stages, as outlined in the book. Although the theory is based on studies of violent criminals, a lighter version of these phases operates in relationships and people all around us. Stage 1 is called brutalization, and it is comprised of 3 substages. You're probably really going to want to go to the original blog post. The first is violent subjugation phase, where a sense of dominance of the aggressor over a victim is established between 2 people through fear. The fear could be psychological or physical. The fear could be of not living up to harsh inner standards or fear of hurting someone, for example. Even though true equality/partnership is rare in relationships, couples, friends, and coworkers often find a way to balance each other. Eventually, one member of the relationship might realize that over time they have over-adapted in a way that has given their partner power over them. Unfortunately, our tolerance or capacity to be flexible can enable people to subjugate us. Once someone has gained power, even when we permitted it to happen, they rarely give it up. By avoiding conflict, one day we might feel like a victim and want to fight back. In these cases, the lesson is to gain the courage to regain our power and force a new balance in the relationship. In the personal horrification phase, a person feels helpless to do anything about the power imbalance in the relationship. Quote, a burning rage can begin to slowly simmer and develop, end quote. The inner rage replaces the sense of helplessness, but new fantasies of revenge pull the person dangerously close to violence. In the violent coaching phase, the dominant person instructs the weaker person how to deal with people who disrespect them, namely to teach them a lesson. Because the subjugated person cannot cross the dominant person, they turn their inner helplessness, which is turned to rage, towards others. If you find yourself being aggressive or impatient with certain people, you might reflect on the dynamic of your relationship with a spouse or parent and how that is holding you back in other areas of your life. Stage 2, belligerency, aka own the libs. In the belligerency stage, the victim who has been coached by their own dominant or abusive authority figure begins targeting others they perceive to have provoked them. Quote, they carefully start slowly at first to display belligerence, which is verbal aggression, and study the reactions of others, relishing in the fear or triggering that results from their behavior. The sense of power can be intoxicating as they push the boundaries of other people's buttons. The fear or trauma they create in others, quote, increases the bully's own inflated, narcissistic sense of self, quote. Sarcasm can be a form of belligerence, depending upon how the sarcastic person uses it and the psychological need it fulfills in them. I have witnessed and experienced this firsthand. I often ask the aggressor, usually on Twitter, which I'm not on anymore, why they are so mean, or point out that their desire to dominate reveals their inner weakness. That usually makes them go away and seek out someone else to make suffer. I love teaching clients how to respond to belligerent people by exploring the root of their emotional response, which is usually fear of oppression. Coming out the other side and being able to diminish the aggressor's power is empowering. Stage 3, violent performances. In the violent performances stage, the perpetrator, who has, quote, learned during the second stage how to jerk people around using belligerency, seeks to threaten, scare, and dominate another person as they have fantasized, end quote. All that remains is a successful experience of violence to make it real. Once they succeed, the confidence to aggress against others becomes a foundation to build upon. The growing confidence of Nazi groups invading small towns to intimidate is an example. In most cases, the Nazi marchers cover their faces, which might mean they're not quite confident enough to follow through on the mantra of Jews will not replace us. But they are testing the waters, and if they are not countered by good people, we see they are becoming more emboldened. This is a dangerous phase that I fear many otherwise good people are on the verge or already there. Stage 4, virulency. In the virulency stage, old self-doubts are covered up by a sense of indestructibility and become a godlike state that does not allow for any dissent, end quote. Sound familiar? Authoritarians are in reality deeply wounded people that should never have power, and when they do, their psychopathy is contagious. The task is getting them and their most vocal assistants out of power. In the movie Alita, Battle Angel, as she declares, I will not stand by in the presence of evil. It's a wonderful film to inspire your personal journey to self and the version of you that wants to emerge during these times. I offer a link to a video chat with psychiatrist Dr. Bandy Lee, who talks about the psychopathy that has infected so many Americans. And I also share my reflections on the movie Alita, Battle Angel. Rebuilding community, lessons from 2 world wars. I've always seen things that others don't, connected dots in a way people around me respond to with Spock's eyebrow raised, and even gain profound insights about the collective by watching superhero movies 8 or more times. Random people every day find and enjoy my blog post about the deeper meaning of the film Aquaman, for example. I include a link to that in the blog post too. I can go back in time and find many pivot points that brought us to this point. Yes, the election results devastated me, but I also feel exhilarated and my spiritual warrior self has been activated. I was built for times like these. I'm already looking ahead to the time when the long-awaited expansion of consciousness takes root. On the other hand, the process might be slowed down by either not enough people stepping up or others who will be tempted to hold grudges against those who genuinely wish to escape the madness. I'm not a facts and figures person when it comes to history, but one aspect of the 2 world wars that resonated with me was this lesson. Some historians concluded that one contributor to the rise of Hitler and Nazism was the way the Allies not only devastated Germany after World War I, but also failed to help the country rebuild. The Allies corrected this after World War II. We must remember this lesson as some MAGA members discover their own last straw. Cult experts suggest that the moment a cult member realizes they've been lied to is subjective and personal, but that moment puts the potential escape in motion. It is difficult to leave a community that preys on your fears, so I want to introduce you also to Rich Logis of Leaving MAGA. He is a former MAGA who was all in until certain things no longer made sense to him, including the mishandling of COVID-19 and January 6th. He is a kind soul who supports and shares the voices of good people who are swept up in the madness and courageously and remorsefully are seeking to repair relationships with family members and friends. I offer a link to his website. It is incredibly difficult to leave a community that replaced former relationships, which is why we must welcome these people into a new community based on love and human dignity. Another organization is Parents for Peace, which works with families on intervention with other family members who have been radicalized. I include the link to that too. I have a whole host of other resources if you want to explore this topic further, and I offer a lot of links to more blog posts and podcast episodes about the more profound reckoning we're experiencing between, at root, is the archetypal masculine and feminine. Also, I love helping clients with conflict and anger. Anger is a productive emotion that, when explored, can transmute into something creative. Anger wants something from us, but we often don't know how to discover what this is. Instead, we project it onto others unfairly or internalize it, and we suffer. I love working with clients struggling in a relationship with someone who is also willing to explore. I've worked with mothers and daughters separately, couples separately, and together, and even sisters separately. Your conflict has meaning. It's the doorway to growth that is needed now. So, if you go to my website, you can schedule a free exploratory chat to find the deeper meaning in your relationship conflicts. I promise you'll learn something about yourself, even if you don't even hire me. And if you're not ready for coaching, learn the language of your unconscious in my book, Your Soul is Talking. Are you listening? You can buy it or listen to me read all the chapters on this podcast, Dose of Depth. Thanks for being a self-reflecting human. Take care. I'm your host, Deborah Lukovich, and you are listening to Dose of Depth podcast. To get updates on new episodes, my writing, and how I teach my clients to get to know that deeper part of themselves, go to deborahlukovich.com. Oh, and if you're not ready for a coach, learn what my clients know in my book, Your Soul is Talking. Are you listening? 5 Steps to Uncovering Your Hidden Purpose. You can check it out on my website or get it on Amazon.